Hello, everybody. Everybody ready for some gun safety? All right. All right, yeah, let me hear yes, we're ready for some gun safety. All right, well, Gabby and I, on behalf of the staff at Giffords, on behalf of our over 3 million supporters, want to welcome you to the Constitution Center this evening, where we'll hear from the 3 leading candidates for the Democratic nomination for the Pennsylvania Senate race. And I have firm confidence that one of those gun safety champions is going to be the next United States Senator from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So we have, a lot of great conversations ahead of us, but we wanted to start with maybe, I think, the best conversation, one with Gabby Giffords. So first, Gabby, why don't, can I just ask you to introduce yourself?
I'm Gabby Giffords. I'm from Tucson, Arizona. January 8th, 2011 changed my life forever. I was a congresswoman. I was shot in my head while meeting with my constituents. I couldn't walk. I couldn't talk. I watched gun violence destroy too many lives. After the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School, I said, enough is enough. I founded a group called Giffords. We are on a mission to end gun violence.
Thank you so much, Gabby. It's now been 11 years since the shooting in Tucson when you were injured. And you've been through a lot.
Yes.
What have you learned over the last 11 years?
To be grateful for friends and family, and to live every day to the fullest.
And while you're living every day to the fullest, and this woman lives every day to the fullest, do you find that your recovery is a process of discovering a new Gabby Giffords, or like a fight to reclaim the old Gabby Giffords?
The new one. Better, stronger, tougher.
Well, you are an inspiration, obviously, to all of us and to many people around the world. But I have a question. Who inspires you? Is there anybody who has inspired you and motivated you to be who you are today?
John Lewis, the civil rights leader.
Amen, that's right.
I miss him a lot. I miss him immensely. So looking forward, whether it's today or the year ahead of us, what do you hope to accomplish at Giffords? Save lives, save lives, save lives.
Yeah. And I think that is a sentiment that's shared here in this audience. So what is your advice for people looking around their own communities and wondering how they can help?
Be a leader, set an example. Be passionate, be courageous, be your best.
And these are tough times, right?
Yes.
But what do you do when things are difficult?
Move ahead. Do not look back.
And do you ever want to give up?
No way, Jose.
Well, thank you, Gabby. I know you'll be back on stage to give remarks later in the program. But why don't I let you take your seat for now?
Thank you.
And I'll stand up and get things started here. So as part of our program and as part of our work here at Giffords, we have the priority of getting people to do the right thing when it comes to guns. You just heard from who I believe is one of the most motivational, inspirational women and leaders in all this country. But when people are unwilling to do the right thing, we have an insurance policy, and that's called politics. And that's fundamentally what we're here to talk about today. All of the 3 candidates that we'll be hearing from today are motivated to do the right thing. But we also believe that they can use this issue, the gun safety issue, to win this November and help retain control of the Senate and build on our gun safety majority. So we're excited to announce some new polling that we just conducted with Giffords and public policy polling of likely general election voters in Pennsylvania. Our polling found that more than half of Pennsylvanians think we need stronger gun laws, with 83% supporting universal background checks. 66% of Pennsylvania voters said that doing more to prevent gun violence was either the most important issue or a very important issue. The problem, however, is that fewer than half of Pennsylvanians actually know that no background check is required in all gun sales. So the candidate who is the nominee for the Democratic Party for Senate is going to have a golden opportunity to talk to Pennsylvanians across the Commonwealth, educate them about the need for stronger gun laws, like universal background checks, the need to invest in our communities through life-saving violence intervention strategies, and draw a stark contrast, if it's there, with their opponent on the Republican side, on the safety of our kids, the safety of our communities. Last midterms, guns was the second most important issue for Democratic voters. We voted out using strategies and messages similar to the ones that we're outlining right now, 40 NRA-backed Republican incumbents. We can use those same messages, those same strategies to bring this gun safety Congress back to Washington, to continue the work that they've done, to send universal background checks from the House back to the Senate, to finally get it passed and signed into law, and to invest $5 billion in life-saving violence intervention strategies. Americans are desperate for safety in their schools, in their communities, for their children. And I know that this November, millions of Pennsylvanians are going to go to the polls and vote for the candidate who's going to keep their kids and keep their communities safe from gun violence. And we are so excited to hear from the top three candidates for the Democratic nomination for the U.S. Senate on their vision for how to keep our communities safe here in Pennsylvania, and how we can build a winning coalition and elect one of them to the United States Senate this November. With that, I would now like to introduce our moderator for the evening, a friend, a former Congresswoman, and Giffords Senior Advisor, Debbie McCarsell-Powell. The first South American-born immigrant ever elected to Congress, Debbie immigrated to the United States at the age of 14 with her mother and three sisters. When she was 24, Debbie's father was murdered, which led her to dedicate her life to advocating for common sense gun safety reform. Debbie was elected to Florida's 26th congressional district in 2018. In Congress, she focused on foreign affairs, education, healthcare policy, the environment, and gun violence prevention. She sat on the Judiciary Subcommittee on Crime, Terrorism, and Homeland Security, say that 3 times fast, and served as the vice chair of the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force, where she has led efforts to pass the first gun safety legislation in 25 years. Ladies and gentlemen, I am very proud to introduce Debbie McCarsell-Powell.
Good evening, Pennsylvania. Can everybody hear me okay? It is such an honor to be here with you tonight and welcome all of you to the Giffords, Pennsylvania Gun Safety Forum. Thank you so much for all of our 3 candidates that agreed to participate in this forum, and our co-chairs who hosted the event, and everyone here present tonight. As Peter was mentioning to you, my name is Debbie McCarsell-Powell. I was the former Congresswoman for Florida's 26th District, and gun violence has been an issue that has been close and dear to my heart for many years. I've been working on gun safety reform for too long. I decided to run for Congress because I knew that we needed people with courage to stand up to the gun lobby, and courage to fight. As a mother of 3 children, 2 of them still in school, every time I hear of another senseless shooting, my heart breaks. We carry this trauma with us every single day. And through that pain and that trauma, I have become very, very close to so many families that have shared that senseless tragedy, like the one that I did when I was 24, when I lost my father to gun violence. And that is one of the reasons why I am so honored to work with Giffords as senior advisor. I met Gabby when I was elected to Congress, and I realized very quickly that it was Giffords who worked relentlessly, thanks to the leadership of Gabby, to pass legislation that was going to protect more lives. And because of Giffords' work, working closely with me and other members in Congress, we were able to pass for the first time in 20 years in the Judiciary Committee, H.R. 8, which was the Universal Background Check Bill. And we know that this Congress passed it once again, and yet it's sitting on the Senate. And that is why this is such an important event tonight, because we know that we need to elect courageous, fearless, gun champion leaders that are going to make a difference for all of our communities, for our children, so that they can feel safe when they go to school, so people can feel safe when they go and worship, for parents that go out right before school and purchase school supplies so that they're not scared that they're going to be shot just by doing something so mundane as that. We cannot continue to live in a place where we are in fear of losing our lives or our loved ones. We know that gun violence continues to spike. Just last year, we lost 45,000 Americans to gun violence. In Pennsylvania alone, we lost 1,752 Pennsylvanians to gun violence. We know that across the nation, gun violence is the #1 cause of death for children under the age of 18. This is a public and safety crisis on a scale that we have not seen in any other developed nation. The race for this state's open Senate seat is a critically important part of fighting for gun safety. And as we all know, it is very important that we fight for this gun safety and elect more gun safety leaders to the Senate in 2022 so that we can continue to build upon our existing majority and finally pass meaningful legislation to curb our nation's epidemic of violence. In organizing this forum, our goal was to ensure that all of you, Pennsylvania voters, hear directly from the candidates on this issue before you cast your primary election ballot. So we are so thrilled to have with us tonight Congressman Conor Lamb, State Representative Malcolm Kenyatta, and Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman. Just to give you a little bit of business for tonight's event, candidates are going to come on stage one at a time. We are going to be asking them a series of questions. We're going to turn it over to you, our audience, to ask a few questions yourselves. We will be hearing from our honorary co-chairs. Some of them are not here this evening, so you will be seeing a video. We are going to take a 2 10-minute break, one after Representative Lamb's questions and one after, not Fetterman, Kenyatta. So if you can, please stay in your seats while we're conducting the questions, and then you can stretch your legs, use the restroom during our breaks. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce to you the first candidate tonight, Representative Conor Lamb. I served with Representative Lamb. You can take a seat right there, yeah. Representative Lamb was elected to Congress to serve the 17th District of Pennsylvania in 2020. He has been a tireless advocate for gun safety reforms. In Congress, he was one of the co-sponsors of H.R. 8, the Bipartisan Background Check Act, a key piece of gun safety legislation that would close dangerous loopholes in our federal gun laws. Prior to serving in Congress, Representative Lamb served as a Marine and was an assistant U.S. attorney. Thank you, Conor, for joining us tonight.
It's nice to see you again. Welcome to Pennsylvania.
How are you doing?
Really good, thanks.
Yeah? So I wanted to ask you, in everything that you've gone through your lived experiences, how has that shaped your views on gun reform, gun laws, and why do you believe Tell our audience why you think you would be the most qualified candidate to serve on the Senate.
Sure. For me, I think one of the most important experiences of my whole life and something that really shaped me into who I am today was becoming a Marine officer. They change you and they teach you a lot going through that experience. And that was actually really my first experience in life ever handling a firearm. I didn't grow up in a house with one. We didn't hunt, anything like that. And so when I got there and sort of became part of that culture, all I knew of firearms was to respect them as almost like sacred objects. That's the way that Marines think about them. We're very comfortable with firearms. Obviously, it's essential to our mission, but when you're training, they make you learn how to hold a firearm, clean it, disassemble it for months at a time before you're ever issued a live round actually to shoot on the range. And there's all these, you've seen it in the movies and stuff, but there's sort of all these rituals that go into teaching people to respect the weapon. And that's both to use it effectively in combat and accomplish the Marine Corps' mission, but a lot of it has to do with the welfare of the people that you're serving with. The first thing that they're trying to avoid is a loose round injuring a fellow Marine in any way. And so I think for me it was shocking to kind of go through that experience and be part of that culture and return to the United States at the end of my service and kind of go back into the civilian world and then eventually get into politics and just see this cavalier and disrespectful way that people talk about and handle firearms now, and particularly, people who you'd think of as my political opponents. But this whole thing last year with people, taking pictures of their families at the holidays, holding all these different weapons in crazy ways, it's just so far from what we were taught, and what we were trained in that, my hope is that I can be someone that tries to bridge the divide on this issue by returning the culture of firearm ownership to something that's about heritage and tradition and carefulness and respect. And I do think that a lot of firearm owners do still feel that way, and they pass weapons down from father to son. I'm a gun owner, and I got my gun from my father-in-law when I asked his daughter to marry me. I mean, it was just it's kind of how it happens in Pennsylvania. But he told me he was either going to use it on me or give it to me. And he was holding it in his hands when he said that, and then he kind of paused for a second, and I didn't know which one was going to be, and he handed it over. So, I just think that has allowed me, and then with my law enforcement experience, I really spent a lot of time prosecuting firearms traffickers, doing what they call straw purchaser cases with the ATF. And so I think that has helped me running in a pretty conservative part of Pennsylvania where they really, a lot of people own guns and they're very skeptical of any sort of government regulation of it, to just talk to people about why I believe what I believe. That I really am not someone with an agenda to come and take their firearms away, but someone who is just trying to promote, obeying the law and being responsible. Just one final little canard. I was at an event in my district last year, and it was in a more conservative part of the district, and I forget how we got on the topic, but I was talking to a retired steelworker about politics there and the fear that so many people have that, they're coming to take your guns. And the guy, I'll never forget this, he turned to me and he goes, son, I'm old enough that I can remember when they told me that Lyndon Johnson was going to take my guns. And then he kind of paused and he goes, I've bought 15 guns since then. When are they coming? And I just said, I know they're not, but we have a lot of work to do to convince people of that, and I think that's the kind of thing I could promote.
Yeah, we were joking in Miami that, no, we're not coming to take away your guns. There's so many, where are we going to put them?
Right.
So that's definitely not something that we're talking about when we talk about gun safety. So let me ask you, what do you think, in your opinion, from being in Congress now, what are the top issues that need to be addressed in legislation? What would you focus on in passing the right laws? I mean, there's so many laws that we discuss. HR 8 is one that we've been working on and pushing for. But what other types of legislation would you be championing if you were to be elected?
Right. The HR 8, the Charleston loophole, even the red flag law bills, I almost think of that as low-hanging fruit. That, to me, is just so obvious that every firearm transfer should require a background check in America. And I've talked to a lot of people about that in very conservative areas. And I always say, did you pass the background check? And they say, yeah. I say, exactly. Like, all we want is the same process that you went through for everybody. It's not a controversial position. We've passed that in the House, I don't know, at least probably 3 times in the last few years. And we can't get a vote on it in the United States Senate. It's not like it's getting voted down over there. They just ignore it. So that's one of the reasons we have to take back this seat here in Pennsylvania. So I think that is all critically important but low-hanging fruit. And in an environment of rising crime, and particularly gun violence, we have to go a lot further than that. The emphasis that I would try to bring to it if I was your senator is drawn from my experience in the U.S. Attorney's Office, where I basically more or less spent half of my time doing gun crime and half of my time doing drug crime. And I was always frustrated by the fact that I felt like if you wanted to do a drug case, even a cocaine case that didn't involve anyone dying or really violence of any kind, you could get money, a team of agents, a wiretap if you wanted it. It just seemed like there were buckets of resources available for that type of crime. But then if you wanted to do firearms trafficking cases, like I had this one really important investigation where they were coming out to Western Pennsylvania from the streets of Brooklyn to send, for the most part, vulnerable women into these gun stores to buy, 8, 10 guns at once. And then immediately they're taking them back to New York, selling them on the street, and they're being used in crimes. I wanted to climb to the top of that thing the same way we do in drug trafficking cases, but you don't get enough ATF agents. They don't do wiretaps in those cases. They don't, like in a lot of situations, going after gun store owners who are complicit to a certain degree in many of these situations. And so it was like an imbalance in resources, and I looked up recently, the DEA, I think, gets $4 for every dollar that the ATF gets, more or less. So, I would love to be someone who is addressing the budgetary issues behind that, the legislative issues that say, we are probably overinvested still in the war on drugs. As you guys know, Washington, D.C., once a government agency gets created, it usually grows. It doesn't typically recede. And so all these programs have grown since the war on drugs, even though our priority now on drugs really should have a lot more to do with treatment and prevention. And I think we should be shifting those resources toward gun violence prosecution as well as prevention. And so I'd love to see that shift of resources take place so that, the next version of me in a new generation would be able to really go after gun violence with all the tools that the federal government can bring to bear, which are many.
Yeah, and some really great news today. I don't know if you saw that President Biden is actually finally passing new rules under the Department of Justice to address ghost guns. But also he has a nominee now to lead the Department of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. So that's really
good news. But I don't think most people don't know the history, but for many, many years, the NRA actually lobbied against budgetary increases for the ATF. And they even lobbied for and you can look up an article that writes all about this, but they even lobbied for a provision that kept the ATF from being allowed to have basically an electronic database of all the information they collect about gun purchases. So there's literally a warehouse in West Virginia where the paper records of all these gun sales are held. And when you're like me and you find out that a shooting has been committed and they're trying to trace the firearm, there's people walking through aisles in this warehouse in West Virginia trying to find records in the year 2022. That's the kind of thing I mean. We would never accept that in other areas of criminal law enforcement. It takes too long. It doesn't match the urgency of the situation. And we have to, hopefully with this new director, we can give him some of the tools he needs to do his job.
So as you've been traveling the state, talking to different voters, what have you seen are the biggest misconceptions about this issue? You mentioned the one that we hear all the time, that people think that we're there to pass laws to take people's guns away, which is the furthest thing from the truth. That's not what we're trying to do here. But what are other misconceptions that you've heard, and how do you have these conversations with Pennsylvanians?
That's right. I think another misconception that is very common is when people see a lot of headlines in the news and on TV news about rising gun violence, shooting, murders. If it bleeds, it leads, right? So it's very, very much in the news. And I don't think the average person really maybe appreciates all of the all of the complexities that drive a rise in gun violence. You know, there's a very simple story told, particularly by supporters of the previous president, that like, you know, just being soft on crime means all of a sudden, you know, criminals emerge and start shooting and thinking they can get away with things. That's not at all how it works. You know, when you talk to actual police or community leaders or people who are in the thick of this problem, it's a very different gun violence problem today, even than it was in the recent past. It's a lot of young people. Social media is very much involved. It's very much related to the pandemic and the conditions of stress that people were under. It actually all began in 2020 before there was a change of administration. And so, you know, another lesson of the Marine Corps that they train you in is fight the battle that you're in, not the one that you wish you were in, not necessarily the one you were trained for. But you have to see the environment for what it actually is. And so, you know, I think if we are this year offering people our plans and ideas for how we're going to keep them safe and how we're going to reduce gun violence in a city like Philadelphia, you know, we have to give a credible account of what is actually going on. And so, yes, we have to use the tools of law enforcement against people that commit shootings, people that trade in firearms, all that sort of thing. But there's an entire world of things we should be investing in and doing when it comes to prevention. You know, I know I'm crushing you with Marine Corps language here, but you know, we call that getting left of the boom. You know, when there were IEDs going off in other countries, the whole idea was if you can intervene in the situation before that thing ever gets planted, you're going to save people's lives. Well, think about what's happening here. If you have young people getting in fights on social media, not having enough places to direct their energy, what could you do to stop that? Well, it turns out there's a history to this. You know, in the early 2000s, there was a program right here in Philadelphia where precinct by precinct, they relied on community leaders, church pastors, local elected officials, anyone that would be part of it to identify in each place, you know, give us 50 kids that are the most likely to either shoot or be shot at in the next year. You know, and once you have the list, you can intervene with them. I'm not talking about identifying them to harass them or bring them into the criminal justice system. I'm talking about identifying them to, you know, being able to direct them to other things. You know, youth sports. I mean, traveling around this city, youth sports and recreation is so underfunded. It is just incredible. And you have these great people coming out and coaching football teams and trying to clean up parks all on their own without enough help. And you think about all the money we've spent from the federal government just in the last few years on these different things. How could we not be investing in things like this that we know can save kids' lives? And so your question was about misconceptions. I think the basic misconception is people think either there's nothing we can do about it or that what we have to do about it is be, you know, reactionary and pound our chests about, you know, crime and law enforcement. And the fact is we have to address the roots of the problem if we have to solve it at all. And there's a lot of history proving that. It's also just the right things to do. I mean, these are our young people, and we should try to save them before they ever even end up in these situations.
No, I agree with you. I mean, community prevention programs to prevent violence, I think, is one of the best investments we can be making. We've had a lot of conversations with
it is. And actually, in Build Back Better, you know, what we were trying to get through, and we passed it in the House of Representatives, it had a record amount of money for exactly this type of thing. I mean, that could be hitting the streets in Philadelphia right now if we had gotten that through the Senate. So it's a perfect example of what we're talking about here.
So we're going to shift a little bit. You know, this is a tragic statistic, and we are seeing a rise of gun violence as it pertains to suicides. Nearly 1,000 people die from gun suicide in Pennsylvania every single year. It makes up actually more than half of all gun deaths in the state. American veterans have historically faced even greater risk. In 2019, at least 187 veterans lost their lives to gun suicide in Pennsylvania. What do you think is the most important first step in addressing this crisis? What would you do if you got elected?
This one is harder, I think, because you know what I know about crime and having worked in that area, it has risen and fallen over time. We understand some of the roots of it. We understand some successful programs like the one I've been talking about to intervene and try to lessen violence. Suicide is rising in a lot of different places in America all at once in a very consistent way. And it's affecting veterans quite a lot, but it's affecting the civilian population too. So obviously anything that we can do to just sort of make people safer from firearms generally is going to be effective. You know, whether it's the emergency risk protection orders are a great example. The people closest to someone who is going through either, you know, a mental health episode or maybe people who are implicated in domestic violence, all of that is going to be powerful. But I think the drivers of suicide, you know, have a lot to do with isolation, addiction, you know, joblessness, lack of hope, things for which, you know, we don't really have a single silver bullet. I can say that on the Veterans Committee where I serve, I came into Congress, I think, with the stat being 22 veterans a day committing suicide. We now think that number may be closer to 18. But the biggest problem we have with it actually is that, let's say that it's 18, maybe 6 of those people are actually enrolled in the veterans health system and eligible for and receiving treatment of some kind. 12 of them, you know, 2/3 of them are not. They're just out there beyond our grasp. We don't really know who they are. We don't really know what their situation is or what's putting them in a position where they would take their life. And so even just sort of breaking down those barriers and connecting with someone enough to make them want to seek treatment, talk about what's bothering them is very difficult. We are trying things with sort of peer groups, veterans groups. We know for sure that at least among veterans, the most likely person that someone will talk to about their problem is someone that they served with in the same unit. And so we've tried to find ways to empower those people to intervene. But, you know, what's the civilian equivalent of that? If the person is not a member of a church or a family that cares about them, or, you know, a valued coworker where people may spot what's going on, there's just a lot of things about our society right now that are isolating people, and we have to find ways to correct that.
And there are other pieces of legislation. I don't know where the extreme risk law is, if it's passed the House in this Congress?
We've passed at least one. I don't believe we've done it in this Congress. I think we did it in the Congress we shared, and I'm sure we will do it again. Many states, of course, do have these opportunities, and then, you know, here in Pennsylvania, the whole issue of protection from abuse in domestic violence situations, there are possibilities to remove firearms in those cases. But again, I'm talking about, I think, before we even get to the stage where the person's picking up the firearm, I think we need to be a lot more serious about the way we try to kind of reconnect people to the common good, I guess. And it's harder to do in an era of social media and various forces that are, you know, they separate people into smaller and smaller categories. But we know that things like addiction are very powerful parts of it. And so even if we were just trying to increase our public response to a problem like addiction by making treatment more widely available for people, that would probably have a lot to do with it.
Well, great. So now, the moment that I was waiting for, some questions from the audience. First up, we have Darlene from Philadelphia. Darlene, if you could please stand up. Where's Darlene? If you could please introduce yourselves to the audience and to us and ask your question.
Good evening, everyone. It is an honor to be here in discussion of something that is so passionate about, that my family and I are so passionate about. And my name is Darlene Wilson. This is my 20-year-old son, Justin Wilson, and on June 28th, 2009, his life was taken by gun violence. So this is a very passionate issue for us. Congressman Lamb, my question is, in Pennsylvania, black people are 22 times more likely to die of gun homicide than white people. What steps would you take as senator to address surging gun homicide rates in black and brown communities?
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing the picture of Justin. I'm a new father, and that is something I think about, a lot. So I'm sorry for your loss. I think the way that we can honor someone like Justin and protect children, you know, here now, particularly black children, is there's no cheap way to do what we're talking about. You know, the program that I was talking about here in Philadelphia, and I think I saw a couple heads nodding, so some of you probably could tell me more about it than I really know. It's very expensive to do that kind of work. Think about if you took every precinct in the city of Philadelphia and actually had a strong, consistent, sustained program of intervention in the lives of 50 young people in every one of those precincts. I mean, that is a full-time job for a lot of people, right? Which means you're spending money. That being said, it's the lives of there's There's no dollar amount you could put on even a single life like Justin's, let alone all of the people that we're losing, you know, in my mind, preventably every single year. And so, you know, I think when we talk about things like the money that I mentioned that President Biden proposed to fund programs exactly like this, it probably wasn't even enough for what we need. I think it was $5 billion originally. That gets voted through in the House of Representatives. It gets ignored in the United States Senate. But we will get it through at some point. You know, I mean, what you get with someone like me, you know, trained as I am, the workforce, you know, the work experience that I've had, this is a problem that I'm going to attack until it's done in one form or another. I mean, you attack through the objective in a situation like I've come from. So we will get there. We will get the funding eventually. And I think the obligation that we then have is to make sure it is prioritized for the black community and the highest need areas within that. So, you know, some federal programs are dole it out to everybody on an equal basis by population, for example. This cannot be that. This has to be targeted, directed, and concentrated in the places that need it the most, which means that we need people like the people in this room. You know, when we finally are at the 5-yard line and pushing a bill like this over the line, we're going to need to know exactly which community groups are the most effective and know how to do this work. And I know that, you know, just from reading the Inquirer, that some of this is happening right now with Mayor Kenny's proposal to shift budget dollars in this direction, and so I think the ground will be prepared. But this is an old-fashioned budgetary fight, and we have to make sure that this community gets its fair share to save people. That's how I would answer it.
Thank you for sharing, Darlene. I can't tell you how many moms and dads have been meeting all over the United States with the same story of their child losing their life to this epidemic. But that's why these seats are so critical. We have now Andy from Downingtown. Andy. Where's Andy? There's Andy. Okay. If you could introduce yourself, please, Andy, before asking the question.
My name is Andy Hubbard. I'm from Chester County, Downingtown, and I work with an organization called Gun Census, which is trying to involve firearm owners and non-owners and come to common sense support for violence prevention. Welcome to Philadelphia. Mr. Lamb, in recent years, we've seen a rise in hate crimes committed with firearms. Here in Pennsylvania, as you know, we experienced this firsthand when a gunman killed 11 people in the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. If elected, can you tell us your plan to address this rise in hate-based violence in the United States?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And I know the sister of 2 of the victims of Tree of Life. I was at the scene that day within a couple of hours of when it happened, and went to a couple of the funerals. So that's something that's going to stay with me for a long time. You know, when it happened, actually the guy who is now the Prime Minister of Israel at the time was a cabinet official in the Israeli government, and when it happened, he jumped on a plane, and he was that government's representative in the city of Pittsburgh to just kind of show solidarity for what had happened. And I sat across the table from him, and I asked him, I said, you know, I know that the Israelis are famous for their technological sophistication. You're always dealing with terrorism and cyber attacks and that kind of thing. Is there anything we can do here to prevent things like this? Because the guy who committed that series of murders, he wasn't a well-known person, but he had made a comment on a social network about, it was in reference to the Jewish community's support for refugees and the way that they helped resettle them. And he had made a comment which, if it had been seen by the right people, would have been a pretty clear warning sign that there was something wrong. And it went totally unaddressed. And Bennett's response to me then was, yes, we know how to deal with things like this, but we don't have a First Amendment. You know, and it was kind of a startling moment of realizing the situation that we are in. There isn't a great answer yet for how we kind of monitor and police social media to try to prevent things like this. I hope that there will be one day. I don't think we've invested enough time in the Congress of figuring out a lot of things about social media and the harm that it causes. So I'm not giving up on that one. But I do think that the emphasis the FBI and law enforcement in general has finally started placing on right-wing domestic terrorism and the hate groups that are associated with it in very clear and unequivocal terms. You know, what happens when Director Wray goes up to Capitol Hill to testify is there's a bunch of Republicans who basically try to get him to say, well, you know, sure, there are white supremacists and domestic terrorists, but aren't there also Antifa on the other side? Isn't it really just all political extremism? And the fact, the actual documented and proven fact is that right-wing domestic terrorism is probably our largest internal threat connected to all these hate groups at this point. And so the FBI has really started going after this in the way that the FBI does, you know, getting inside of these organizations and trying to dismantle them. You can see from January 6th is the largest criminal investigation in American history, and they have indicted more people than have ever been indicted in a single series of prosecutions before. They're showing you how good they are at this and the way that they know to do it, and that's new. I mean, like, that wasn't really happening very often when I was prosecuting cases, and so, you know, they have done a really good job prioritizing it. It's on people like me to make sure they continue getting the funding and the legislation that they need to do this job.
Well, thank you so much, Representative Lamb, for coming tonight. We know that if you get elected, we are going to have a champion leading this issue in the Senate. We wish you all the luck in the world, and I would love to have Gabby, if she can, come out and take a photo with you.
Sure. We're so thankful that you came and visited us here. You guys may not realize this, but you're looking at a real star in our party here that we were very lucky to have in Congress. And thank all of you for how involved you are in this issue. I would very much be honored to represent every one of you. Thank you. Thank you. That's great.
Thank you, everyone. We can take a 10-minute break now.
Please. Ready? Please take your seats. The program will be resuming shortly. Please take your seats.
Welcome back. As we were planning this forum, we thought that it was extremely important to raise up other voices here in Pennsylvania who have been championing this issue for quite some time. A number of them are here with us in person, and we know that we're going to see some of them through video as co-chairs. But first, it is such an honor for me to be able to introduce to you former Governor Ed Rendell. He told me, it's not Rendell, it's Rendell, it rhymes with Bell. So thank you, Governor, for that. Governor Rendell is an honorary co-chair of tonight's event. He is a two-term district attorney of Philadelphia, two-term mayor of Philadelphia, two-term governor of Pennsylvania, and a lifelong gun safety champion. Governor Rendell, thank you so much for joining us here tonight.
Good evening, everyone. I was telling some of the people backstage, I think I've been at this podium about 1,006 times. It's nice to be back for the 1,007th. Look, I don't think you need me to tell you how important this election is. You care very deeply about this issue, and this is a very central issue, but it's only one of a number of things that we have to resolve in Pennsylvania and in the United States. And this election, the election for a senator in Pennsylvania, will, in my judgment, determine who controls the Senate. If we win this election, we have to just hold serve, meaning hold our four incumbents who are running, and win back one more seat to guarantee control of the Senate for probably at least another 6 to 8 years. We can do a lot with that. We can defend, we can go on offense, but it is crucial that we control the Senate. So if you have friends and relatives who are saying, I might not vote, I don't like what's going on, tell them it's not a choice between the perfect and the lousy, it's a choice between the better, and we're clearly better. If this country has any hope, we've got to hold on to the government to do some things. If you notice the things that President Biden's tried to do, he's done some good things, but because our margin is so slim, it's prevented us from doing other good things, like passing gun legislation. So we can do this, but everyone's got to get out there and not just vote, but you have to bring 5 or 6 people who are recalcitrant, bring them to the polls. And on this issue, if somebody says it doesn't matter, nothing can stop people who are crazy from killing. Maybe, maybe not. But I told Gabby today when I saw her outside that I use the example when I've been speaking for the last decade of what happened in her case when the guy came into the shopping center and opened up firing. He had a 40-bullet magazine. He discharged all 40 bullets, and I think he killed 7 or 8 and injured about 15. 22 out of 40 shots he hit. But let's assume he only had a 10-bullet magazine. Remember, when he stopped to unload his 40-bullet magazine, the woman came up with a handbag and slammed the handbag against his gun, dislodging the gun, and 2 citizens just got him under control. Well, assume he only had a 10-bullet magazine, and he was trying to reload the 10-bullet magazine when she smacked the handbag against it. 1/4 of the shots would have been fired. So it's safe to assume that 3/4 of the people who were shot and either injured or killed would have survived. There's no way to talk your way out of that. That's pure mathematics. It matters. It saves lives. It saves people's families from being disrupted. It saves children from losing their fathers or their mothers. It's important, and we've got to make sure this issue, like so many other issues, gets addressed in Washington. And who wins our election here in Pennsylvania is going to be determinative of what happens. We're lucky we have 3 good candidates. I haven't endorsed anybody yet. I may shortly down the road. But it doesn't matter who I endorse. It matters who you endorse. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Governor. Thank you so much. Thank you. A round of applause, please, for Governor Rendell. Next, I'd like to introduce to you a co-chair of tonight's forum, Representative Dwight Evans. Congressman Evans represents Pennsylvania's 3rd Congressional District. In Congress, he has been a lead co-sponsor of the Equal Access to Justice for Victims of Gun Violence Act, which would repeal the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act. Representative Evans, thank you for joining us tonight. Another good friend. Representative, how are you doing?
One, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity. As the governor sort of said, and I just heard a few words, probably nothing is more important than this issue about gun safety. This is an issue that every single community in the nation is affected. And it's something that I've been working on my entire career. My 6 years in the United States Congress, in my 36 years in the State House. And nothing is more important that we beat this. But we will only do it together. I had the pleasure of being with the late John Lewis, someone who you all know. And John Lewis used to always talk about the aspect of never giving up. And you have demonstrated that. And I just told the Congresswoman that I'm proud of her and her leadership and what she has shown. The universal background check that I voted for, affecting guns in terms of being able the ability to sue the gun manufacturers, the Charlotte loophole. But it's the collectivism of working together. And it's all of us getting the message across in this country that violence is extremely destructive, gun violence especially. So I share with you tonight that I join as the pleasure of being one of the co-chairs to show all the leadership here in the city of Philadelphia, across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, to show the kind of collective leadership that is something that we will never give up in trying to defeat, because of the impact that it's having on all our communities. You know, the President of the United States said the right thing when he said in the Rose Garden, when he talked about guns as an epidemic in this country. And the fact that he talked today about attempting to deal with ghost guns. So it is that kind of leadership, having a president, having a vice president, and having all of us at the local levels all across the Commonwealth, especially here in Pennsylvania. I could tell you that, because after being in the legislature as long as I've been in there, when I was in there, it was the fact of the matter, it was something we needed to be. But all of you are extremely important from the bottom up, borough by borough, house by house, township by township, is the only way we will beat this gun safety. I'd like to say thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you, Representative Evans. I know that you're fighting the good fight over there in D.C. Now I would like to introduce to you a dear friend and Representative Mary Gay Scallon, who unfortunately could not join us tonight here in person, but she will be sharing some words via video. Representative Scallon represents Pennsylvania's 5th Congressional District. She recently introduced her own legislation to prevent gun sellers from circumventing technology companies' terms of service by making it illegal to fraudulently sell firearms and ammunition online. Now we're going to hear a few words from Representative Scallon.
Good evening. I'm Mary Gay Scanlon, Congresswoman for Pennsylvania's 5th District. In 2018, it was my honor to be elected to Congress, along with the first gun safety majority to hold the House in decades. That majority has allowed us to hold hearings and pass multiple bills through the House, which would advance the goal of bringing common sense gun safety to our streets, our schools, our houses of worship, and our country. But almost all of those measures have been blocked by the Senate. That's why the forum that you're holding here tonight is so very important. We have the chance this year to elect a gun safety champion as Pennsylvania's next U.S. Senator, to help break the logjam of legislation that's preventing us from addressing the epidemic of gun violence in this country. Now more than ever, we need candidates for office who are ready to confront this question head on. Thank you to Giffords for organizing this forum and for all the candidates who came here to discuss an issue that is literally life and death for people here in Philadelphia and across the country. Now, more than ever, we need more gun safety allies in the Senate. I look forward to hearing the candidates discuss how they plan to end our national nightmare of gun violence. I look forward to hearing their proposals for common sense gun safety laws, because we know that there's not one solution to the complexity of America's gun violence epidemic. And I want to thank Gabby and the Giffords organization for the thoughtful, research-based policy proposals that you offer all of us, for bringing us together for this conversation, and for all you do to end gun violence in America. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Gay. Now I have the honor to introduce to you our next candidate, Representative Malcolm Kenyatta. Representative Kenyatta serves the 181st Legislative District. He has introduced gun safety legislation in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives and serves on the Governor's Task Force on Suicide Prevention. Prior to serving in the Pennsylvania House, Representative Kenyatta was a community activist. He holds degrees from Temple University, the Harvard University Kennedy School of Government, and Drexel University. I hear Representative Kenyatta not here yet? 1 minute. In 1 minute, we will be welcoming Representative Kenyatta. I like the, the signs I'm getting out there. Listen, I'm here. I can answer any questions you'd like. I can practice some questions for my next debate sometime in the future. 2, 4 years, 6, who knows? No, this has been actually a really great day for us, for all of you who have been supporting this issue, for so many families that have been affected by gun violence. I was at the White House today when President Biden announced the new nominee for the ATF, and also the new rules that we're going to be putting in place to start controlling and providing oversight for these ghost guns. And he said something that really stuck with me. I mean, it's these guns are being bought through the internet without any serial numbers to it. People can build them very easily. They had actually a packet there as a sample. And it's usually purchased by people that would not otherwise pass a background check. These weapons are being purchased by people that want to cause harm, and they're not being traced. Law enforcement has been asking the government to do something about this. So today was a really critical day in one further step in trying to protect our communities addressing this issue. We heard from a student who lost her best friend through a shooting in Michigan, I think it was. And she spoke so eloquently. She had also been shot. And the parents of that child was there. And I can't begin to tell you how many families, so many of us have met across America that carry that pain, and yet they continue to use that pain in positive action. And so for that, we are so grateful at Giffords and to all of them for continuing to use their voice. And I got a thumbs up. We have our candidate Kenyatta. Please come to stage. So, how are you doing?
I'm here with you. I'm living the dream.
How's everything? Yeah? So I wanted to ask you if you could just begin by telling us a little bit about your life experiences and how that has shaped your views on gun safety legislation, And why would you say you are the most qualified candidate in this primary in being a champion for gun safety for the nation and for Pennsylvanians?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you again, and thank you for having this conversation, and happy that so many people in this room, I know how much work that you do to try to put an end to one of the biggest public health crises that we have, which is gun violence. This question is the main distinction in this race. Every person who you hear come on this stage is going to be for dealing with high-capacity magazines and dealing with assault weapons. They're all going to be for reducing gun violence. They're all going to be for passing a lot of the same bills. The difference is, when I go home tonight, I might have another shooting on my block. I've had so many people in my community who've been murdered. Right now, we have over 100 people murdered in the city of Philadelphia this year, outpacing the numbers we had last year, which was the deadliest year in terms of gun homicide since we started counting. That should hit all of us to the core. But as somebody who has spent too much time going to so many funerals, sitting with loved ones who will never be the same, I think it hits a little differently. It hits a little differently. And what I know gets me and gets all the activists and organizers in this room is that we are not at a loss for ideas around what to do. What we lack right now is the political math. You know, I've introduced and co-sponsored numerous pieces of legislation that I'm sure we'll talk about that would make our communities safer. I've done it. The problem is, right now in Harrisburg, we have Republican colleagues who are prioritizing a bill to ban trans kids playing sports instead of taking up even one of these measures that we know could make a major difference. So for me, this is not just something to talk about. It's something that when this campaign is over, when this auditorium is empty, myself and my family and the people in my community, we're still going to be thinking about this, working on this, and committed to ending this crisis, because I do think we have it within our capacity to end this crisis.
Thank you, Representative Kenyatta. And you know, I hear that frustration in your voice, and I've heard it. I have felt it when I was in Congress. I hear it from my colleagues. So, what do you think you would be able to do if you were elected to the United States Senate, understanding that the math is clearly right now 50-50? What type of legislation would you sponsor? What would be the first thing that you would do if you got elected?
So I would take some of the bills that I've already introduced and try to get it done. Here's the reality and why winning this seat is so pivotal. I think that there is a mindset among certainly, you know, political pontificators and folks who've looked at the history of national politics. When you have a president of a certain party who's in office and you have a certain party controlling Washington, usually that swings the other direction. And so there are a lot of people who've said, oh, well, I don't know if Democrats can hold on to this seat, or win this seat rather, from Senator Toomey since he's leaving. I think that when we win this seat, we're going to shock a lot of people. Yeah. And when we walk into the Senate, I promise you, they ain't never met nobody named Malcolm Kenyatta. And I think that a part of what we're going to bring to that conversation is what I've brought to the conversation in Harrisburg. I've seen on numerous occasions, I think about COVID. And how myself and other members of the Black Caucus were seeing, you know, spikes in Black and brown communities, and said to the governor, like, hey, we really need to make sure we understand this, that we're collecting the data, so as resources around testing are going out, that they're going to the communities that need them most. But then you have folks on the LGBTQ Governor's Advisory Commission, of which I'm also a member, who said, wait, hold up, Governor. Also, we know that LGBTQ folks have a bunch of comorbidities that make it more likely that they would contract this deadly virus. And so we need to also make sure we're including them. Now, Governor Wolf is a wonderful person. He wasn't resistant to it, but it wasn't something that he had naturally thought of because that wasn't his life experience. And so I think a part of what we need to recognize, and I say this all the time, if we want to change the Senate, we have to change the senators. We've seen the same types of folks be elected who've had certain resumes, and they're the people we pick every single time. And then you see folks who maybe, stylistically look a little different, but frankly, when you start digging into the details, we're talking about the same stuff. I think that what you have in me is somebody who has taken this approach to governance. I refuse to join any of my colleagues on Fantasy Island. I'm not paddling over to Fantasy Island to join them. I'm not debating whether up is up and climate change is real and like the sun is out. Not doing that. But I am the first to meet people at the dock of reality and say, welcome back. What can we now do together? And I think about extreme risk protection orders as an example. Bipartisan piece of legislation. Bipartisan. I think about my bill with Representative Ben Sanchez dealing with lost and stolen guns. We have a number of Republicans on that bill. I think about what has been done already, the Attorney General getting some agreements from folks who are producing ghost guns. These are all things that are common sense, that we just haven't moved because we haven't had control. And so if you look up on election night and we have won this race here in Pennsylvania, a part of what that tells you is that Democrats have held on to the Senate. And the other thing that it tells you is that you're going to have somebody who is in the Senate, who's certainly not afraid, who's certainly not a wallflower, and who will be in that caucus advocating for the things that we should be getting done and that we can get done if we have a bigger, bolder majority.
Thank you. And can you guide me to the dock of reality when you find it, please? I've been looking for that for a while.
We got snacks and everything.
Yeah, please. Tragically, police violence results in more than 1,000 civilian deaths each year, which often leads to significant ruptures in police community trust and fuels the cycle of community violence. As Pennsylvania Senator, how would you approach the topic of police reform that has caused so much tension in these conversations?
So here's yet another example of what happens too often in Washington. All of us understand, I think the entire world, not just in Pennsylvania, the entire world, after George Floyd and Breonna Taylor were murdered, was up in arms. I mean, we saw protests everywhere. We also saw protests in 61 of 67 counties in Pennsylvania. Now, for folks who aren't from Pennsylvania, getting 61 of 67 counties to do anything, that's pretty good. And people were coming out demanding that we do something about police violence and restoring trust between law enforcement and community. Myself, other members of the Black Caucus, in the spirit of John Lewis and Fannie Lou Hamer, actually did a sit-in in the speaker's rostrum and said, no, you can't come back up here until we have agreement to move something. And we had a number of bills that we were able to get moved across the finish line. But what I always, when I tell that story, always like to hammer home is that these were not new bills that were introduced. Not one of my colleagues introduced a new piece of legislation because of this latest instance of police violence. These were old bills, but the difference was all of you. The difference was those people showing up day after day after day all across Pennsylvania demanding that something get done. And I think about Representative Kaufman, who runs the Judiciary Committee, who has said a number of things about gun safety legislation, a number of things about police reform legislation. I think he said something, along the lines of any bill that comes to my committee, I don't know, he said something crazy. But all that being said, even he voted for this legislation because of the public pressure. And so I think when we think about what it's going to take to pass this legislation, certainly we need the political math, but we also need the people math. We need people who aren't elected to anything, but who understand in real terms what this crisis means and are willing to show up in all the different ways that they are willing to show up to engage on this issue to help move the needle forward and create that political opening. As you know very well, you get that moment where there's a political opening to get something done, and then are you ready to jump through it with serious, thoughtful legislation? The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is serious, thoughtful legislation. The problem is, I think we missed the opening to get that done quickly, and I think we put too much faith in folks like Tim Scott that he was going to actually operate in good faith to help make this a bipartisan thing. My approach to this is, when we think about how bipartisan something is, we need to ask regular people what they think about it. Because politicians have different metrics that they're looking at. They're looking at, do I have an opponent? How much money have I? They're looking at all those different things when they make decisions. We should ask regular people what we should do. Most people think that we should have a national use of force, that people should not be able to put in chokeholds, that somebody should not be able to put a knee on the neck of somebody. Most people think that cops should not be able to go into someone's home and shoot them in their bedroom. That's not really up for debate. The issue is, we don't have nearly enough people in Washington who know what I know about being stopped for no reason, simply because of what I look like, and having that embarrassment and that shame from having law enforcement treat you in that way. And so when now there's been a crisis in the community and law enforcement's coming in and they're trying to get information to hold accountable whoever was involved in a particular incident, people are less likely to engage because they don't believe that law enforcement is going to be held accountable for the things that they do, just like we want the people who committed these heinous crimes to be held accountable.
So, you know, you talk about political opening and doing something when you have that opening. Unfortunately, in the Senate, for Mitch McConnell, there's no opening, right? And we have been talking to Americans on universal background checks for years now. We know that close to 90% of Americans support this bill, yet that doesn't pass. So, if you were to get elected, knowing that these bills have passed through the House and there are multiple pieces of legislation, what would you do to bridge that, that divide and get bipartisan support on bills that we know 90% of Americans support?
I don't know if we're going to get bipartisan support on some of these bills, and I think that we have to accept that. But it doesn't mean we can't get the bills passed. A part of what we have to do is get rid of the Jim Crow filibuster. We have to get rid of it. That has been a barrier to progress, not just on gun safety legislation, but on a variety of other issues. That has been a real barrier to us getting things done. And also there's a timidity sometimes from folks in Washington on whether or not we're going to, make a tough statement on this. I promise you this. I'm not afraid of the NRA. I'm not afraid of the Gun Owners of America. I'm not afraid of any of these people. They give me Fs all the time. I wear them like a badge of honor. I'll get another F for coming to this forum. Totally fine.
Maybe
but
a
they have
D.
been a D? No, I want an F, okay? I want an F. So I need to not turn in my homework, a bunch of other things. But the reality is this. We know that people do want this legislation to pass. And where Congress won't act, I'm happy that the president has been willing to act, particularly around ghost guns, which we saw today, the new regulation around ghost guns, which is going to treat them more in line with how we treat other firearm purchases. But one of the things I talk about in this situation as well is the straw purchasing that happens, the gun trafficking that happens. There was, I think, 11 people who were arrested just today for being a part of a gun smuggling ring where over 300 guns were recovered that they're buying in Georgia and then bringing up here to Pennsylvania, which are going to end up in communities like mine. There was a report that was done by City Council that looked at the 100 deaths that we've seen so far this year. Most of them, black men between the age of 18 and 35. And so for me, I don't think we ought to be waiting for anybody. Get rid of the filibuster, get these bills passed. I think that we should have done it the day Kamala Harris came into the chamber. We should have said, hey, Madam Vice President, we got a couple bills that we're going to need to get passed. And certainly everybody was focused on the pandemic, but this gun violence has been a pandemic for longer than COVID, unfortunately.
That's true. Now we are going to take some questions from the audience. We have Emily from Bryn Mawr. Emily, if you could please introduce yourself.
Good evening. I am Emily DiCarlo. I work at the Anti-Violence Partnership of Philadelphia. I am the director of our youth violence outreach programs. Throughout the country, we're seeing levels of gun violence spike to record highs. We know community violence intervention programs can interrupt deadly cycles of violence and save lives. As a senator, how would you ensure that these programs receive adequate support?
So we've tried to do that, and thank you so much for your question and for the work that you're doing. You know, we've tried to do that at the state level right now to get resources to folks who are in community, who are doing things that all of these organizations have done and would do with no money, but who would benefit from being resourced in a way that can help them expand the work that they're doing. And those grants from PCCD have just, I think the last batch, I want to say, went out maybe in January. And so we're talking about millions of dollars that have gone out into these community organizations. And now the question is, for me, how do we take these organizations who so often work in silos and try to say, how can we pool our resources, not just financial resources, but the knowledge resources, the people resources, to work together? Because one of the things I've always said in this approach, you have people who are on the enforcement side, folks who are on the intervention side, folks who are on the prevention side. All of that is necessary. All of that is important. All of that needs a lot more money than we've put into it. And when we think about money that we've put into research at the CDC or NIH, I mean, it pales in comparison to the money that we are putting in to address other crises. And so I think we have to be really strategic about making sure we form those partnerships, but that also that we make historic level investments into studying this and to resourcing organizations that are on the ground doing so much of this work day in and day out.
I agree. Now we have Carol. Carol from, where's Carol? There's Carol. Swarthmore.
Hi, so nice to see you tonight. I am Carol Listoka, and I'm the Southeast PA coordinator with Ceasefire Pennsylvania, and I'm also a gun owner and affiliated with Giffords Gun Owners for Safety. And as we all know and have heard, millions of Americans have become gun owners since the start of the pandemic. Can you talk about what you think responsible gun ownership means in this country, and what policies you support to ensure that both longstanding and new gun owners are engaging in safe practices with their firearms?
Yeah, thank you so much, and good to see you off the Zoom and in real life. Here's what we know. We're sitting in the Constitution Center. We know that the Second Amendment is a part of our founding documents, and that means a lot to a lot of people. I don't own a firearm, don't have an interest in owning a firearm, but I know that there are a lot of people who do. And many people like you not only support using those firearms responsibly, storing them safely, but also support some of the common sense measures that I mentioned, including the legislation which I know we were on, and the governor said he would sign the bill today. My bill with Representative Sanchez that would do something about lost and stolen guns, that would basically say, if your gun is stolen or you lose it, that you have to tell somebody. If any of you go outside right now and your car is gone and you just take the bus home and you don't say nothing, and your gun and your car is used to mow somebody down on the street, I promise you that somebody's gonna have some questions for you. A lot of people are gonna have questions for you. But right now, what we're seeing is that so many babies are getting their hands on weapons. And they're not going to a gun store and buying them. There was a careless adult, or in another version of this, there was an adult who was malicious in their intent and actually gave that firearm over to a young person, and then that young person went out and committed a dangerous offense with it. And so for me, there are things that can be done around biometrics for new weapons to make sure that if you're not the owner, you can't even use the weapon in the first place. There have been so many people, including my dear friend Scott Charles, who has been, talking about gun locks until he's blue in the face. We've done so many different events where he's come to my district to show people how to use gun locks, how to get them out to people. Those things are really important. And we also know this is not an isolated incident. I think about a situation that happened. This was right around the corner from Meade School, which is in my district and around the corner from my house. Somebody left a loaded weapon on their seat of their car. Somebody walking by took a brick or whatever, smashed the glass, took the gun. The next day or two, that gun was used in commission of a crime. So this is not hypothetical when we talk about the importance of those simple measures of making sure the guns have gun locks, that they are in a stored, locked area. Because one of the most painful things for any parent, certainly any parent losing anybody losing anybody who you love for any reason, it is a hole that never goes away. But for people who have a kid who's just playing around with a gun, who ends up losing their lives, that's leaps and bounds beyond what I think anybody can handle. And it is something that we can do something about just by having more people like you who know how to clean, store, isolate their weapons in safe locations and pull them out when they use them responsibly. And I'm grateful that you and that Giffords has an entire organization of you out here talking about how important this is, because that has been the power of the NRA for so long. They have lied and said they're speaking for you. They're not speaking for you. They're speaking for the gun manufacturers. Those are the only people the NRA and other organizations really care about, to be honest.
Well, thank you so much, Representative Kenyatta. I can feel the passion. We know that Pennsylvania is very fortunate to have a representative so passionate and knowledgeable about this issue. Pennsylvanians can't go wrong. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And if Gabby could come and take a picture. Another 10-minute break, everybody. We'll be right with you.
Please take your seats. We'll be resuming momentarily.
Thank you for being so patient. We are now approaching the final part of our program. Before we introduce our third candidate, I want to now introduce you to Representative Madeline Dean, who is currently serving her second term as a Congresswoman for Pennsylvania's 4th Congressional District. In her first term in Congress, Representative Dean's first piece of legislation centered on the need to address ghost guns, which are untraceable and undetectable firearms. Representative Dean can't be here in person this evening, but she did send video remarks for us to play. So let's hear from Madeline.
Hello, I'm Madeline Dean, Congresswoman for the 4th Congressional District of Pennsylvania, Montgomery and Berks counties in suburban Philadelphia. I regret that I am not able to be with you in person, but I know we're all here today, united with the Giffords PAC for the same reason, to address the issue of gun violence in our communities. It was in January of 2011 that I was first asked to run for local office for Township Commissioner. At first I said no, and then I said yes. It was that month that Congresswoman Giffords was shot while in service to our country. It was in 2012 when I was able to first run for state representative in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Like many of you, I remember watching the news of Sandy Hook, the shattering, shocking news of a massacre of children. 20 children, ages 6 and 7, 6 members of their administration, their teachers, slaughtered in a matter of minutes by a senseless and inhumane act of violence. Surely I thought this tragedy would spur on action about gun violence right here in our country. How could it not? How could Republican legislators stand by and defend the status quo in the face of such horror? And then we started to hear some of the same old tired talking points about how now is a time for thoughts and prayers, not a time to politicize tragedy. I disagreed then, and that's why I co-founded and co-chaired the still active PA Safe Caucus in the Pennsylvania State House, a coalition of legislators in Harrisburg dedicated to ending gun violence and to taking action. And in 2022, I continue to disagree and fight back against the passivity that maintains the status quo on gun violence, which resulted in the death of 45,000 Americans in 2020 alone. That's why when I got to Washington, D.C., the first piece of legislation I introduced on the need to address and regulate the relatively new phenomenon of ghost guns, firearms that can be bought online without a background check, lack a serial number, and evade safety measures such as metal detectors. Have we been able to bring that bill up for a vote? Of course not. Not yet. And while I'm proud of this legislation and other efforts, I am very aware of the political reality surrounding gun violence. We simply lack the legislative will, the majorities in the Senate and the House that would allow us progress beyond the status quo. That's why this conversation here tonight is so important. The way I see it, there is no path for meaningful legislative solutions to end gun violence that does not include 2 Democratic senators from Pennsylvania addressing this public health epidemic, one that leads to the senseless, tragic loss of far too many day in and day out. We have to do better. And all of the candidates you will hear from tonight live up to the demands of that leadership, far better than any of those on the other side of the clown car. As Pennsylvania Democrats, we absolutely have what it takes to win this race. We turned the House blue in 2018, secured the presidency in 2020. We have the enthusiasm, the voting power to elect 2 Democratic senators. And I'm committed to work as hard as I can to ensure that we do just that. The cost of further inaction is simply too great. The stakes continue to be simply too high. Come January 2023, I look forward to partnering with Pennsylvania's 2 Democratic senators to address the scourge of gun violence in our communities and across this country to keep my family, your family, our children safe from gun violence. I look forward to getting a brief on this important conversation. I can't wait to learn more about it. Again, I thank you for allowing me to be a part of this tonight. Good night, and may we all continue to do our work to bring safety to our communities. Good night.
Thank you, Representative Dean. Now, our next co-chair, Representative Chrissy Houlihan, unfortunately could not be here tonight, but she did send us some remarks. Representative Houlihan is the first woman to ever represent Pennsylvania's 6th congressional district. In 2018, she ran a campaign focused on gun safety, and she won, flipping a red district blue. She beat an NRA-backed opponent and solidified a gun safety majority in the House for the first time in years. Here are some of her remarks. Thank you so much to Giffords, Gabby Giffords, my fellow co-chairs, and the wonderful candidates participating in tonight's forum. I am sorry that I cannot be there in person, but I am fully with you, all in spirit and mission. We are all too aware in our country, Commonwealth, and communities. Far too many families continue to be devastated by gun violence. In 2019 alone, more than 1,500 gun deaths were reported in Pennsylvania. As an engineer trained to use data to solve problems, what is most infuriating is that this scourge is unique to America. We know the common sense solutions that will reduce violence and keep our communities safe. Without infringing on the rights of gun owners, we can enact universal background checks and keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people, take weapons of war off the streets, eliminate the deregulated portions of the gun industry, and provide funding to study the public health impact that guns are having on American families. In Congress, I am proud to have sponsored, voted for, and helped pass out of the House legislation that does all of that. But to our shame, we have made far too little progress. To enact meaningful, life-saving change, we need the Senate to act. This year, in Pennsylvania, we have the opportunity to elect a gun safety champion to the U.S. Senate who can be a voice in support of the life-saving legislation that we have already passed through the House. I couldn't agree more. And now, I would like to take this moment to introduce our third candidate. I want to welcome Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman. He was elected in 2018. Lieutenant Governor Fetterman believes that common sense gun safety policies will help end the gun violence epidemic. Prior to serving as Lieutenant Governor, he was the mayor of Braddock, Pennsylvania, for 13 years. He also previously served in AmeriCorps and graduated from the Harvard University Kennedy School of Government. Please join me in welcoming Lieutenant Governor Fetterman. Lieutenant Governor, thank you for coming. I'm Debbie. How are you doing tonight?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Well, thank you for joining us. I wanted to start by you sharing with us a little bit of your life experiences and how those experiences have shaped your views on gun safety legislation, and this work.
Well, my views on gun safety and legislation and the scourge of gun violence is the whole reason why I ended up in public service. You know, I never expected to get into elective politics. And 20-odd years ago, I came to a community of Braddock to teach GED classes, and I was a program director. That was how I expected my life to go, and helping young people kind of get their education in check, get their first job. And then 2 of my students were shot to death. And at that point, I had never known people close and personal that died in such a violent, awful manner. So I was just devastated because, one, these were people that I knew and they were like my students, but I felt a sense of powerlessness too, because I could help them get a GED, I could help them get a job, but I couldn't do anything about the danger and the gun violence. So I decided to run for mayor, and this was 17 years ago. So I ran for mayor, and you know, at that time I hadn't been a long-term resident of Braddock, and people that looked like me didn't ever get elected mayor of Braddock. For context, Braddock is about 75% black, and it is one of Pennsylvania's most economically challenged communities. It has a lot of, abandonment. It has a lot of disinvestment. It has a lot of challenges with access to health care and things. So I ran for mayor, and I won and ran on this idea that we need to do something about gun violence, because this, I was never okay with that. I was never okay with just another headline, or it's like, well, that's what you expect because it's just one more headline. And I ran on that, and I won my first election 17 years ago by that one vote. So I was summoned into public service through the violent death and gun violence, and that was 17 years ago. And ultimately, combating gun violence in Braddock was one of the things I was most proud to have achieved during my time, during my 4 terms as mayor.
That's wonderful. That's interesting. I didn't realize that that's one of the reasons why you decided to run for mayor at the time.
It was the reason why I decided to run, because, I mean, getting a GED and a job is great, but if there isn't public safety and there is this kind of disparity, like.
So since this has been an issue that has been close to your heart all this time, what do you think are the top legislative issues that we need to address? If you were to get elected to serve in the Senate, how would you tackle those, or which issues would you focus on?
Sure. Well, there's so many different things that you would like to see done, from basic gun safety. And I want to be clear that an overwhelming majority of Americans, including gun owners, support these kind of basic kinds of reforms. But the truth is also that the way the Senate is structured, unless you have 60 votes, you're not going to be able to achieve them, because you are going to need at least 60 and 10 Republican senators under the current makeup to say, you know what, I agree with you, I'm going to cross the NRA and then cross my constituents and vote for these things. So I'm proud to say that we were the first campaign for the Senate to call for the elimination of the filibuster. And I believe right now Democrats need to vote like Democrats, and we need to eliminate the filibuster and get some important and critical pieces of legislation accomplished, including gun safety legislation. I've always supported a ban to the assault rifle ownership. We should not have weapons of war in the hands of civilians. I have seen with my own eyes at the scenes in my community what a military-grade round does to the human body, and we have no need for civilians to own those kind of weapons. I'm also for the red flag laws, to making sure that we don't have guns in the hands of those that would harm themselves, harm somebody else, or that are just inherently unstable. And we need to make sure that we do not allow the NRA lobby to overrun what an overwhelming majority of Americans want, and that involves coming together as a party, as a caucus, and eliminating the filibuster and getting some of those critical pieces of legislation accomplished.
Yeah, a lot of Americans feel, Democrats especially, probably feel the same way that you do, especially when an overwhelming majority of Americans support a lot of these pieces of legislation, but then nothing has happened.
Well, people ask me all the time, it's like, well, why? I mean, everybody wants this. Well, if something that a majority of Americans want to have happen that doesn't happen, I tell them it starts with an F and ends with an R. And it's filibuster, and that's fundamental. The dynamic.
I know
of the Senate.
when you said F, I got a little nervous.
Yeah, I know, and it's provocative in that sense, but it's the truth.
So, Lieutenant Governor, across the country, we've seen that the gun lobby invests millions to attack any candidate that runs on gun safety issues. It happened to me. It's happened to a lot of my colleagues in Congress. How have your experiences being in office for 17 years and now Lieutenant Governor prepared you to take on the NRA and the NSSF and their radical messaging, endorsing candidates that are actually now promoting guns as part of their campaign?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I'm not afraid of anything, and certainly not the NRA. And let me be clear, the NRA does not represent the overwhelming majority of what gun owners really believe and want. That is the lunatic fringe of gun ownership. And they are disproportionately represented, and that skews the conversation. And pushing back, and I would never make the mistake of thinking that's representative of your average gun owner in America. Pennsylvania has a proud heritage of hunting and reasonable, safe firearm ownership, and that's what I've always supported and always will support. I own guns. I went deer hunting, when I was much younger, and it's abundantly clear to any reasonable Pennsylvania voter that the Democratic Party or my campaign is not here to take your deer hunting rifle and these kind of things, and to speak in very accessible and honest terms of what it really means when we talk about common sense gun reform legislation. And if you believe that you should have a high-powered assault rifle with a large capacity magazine, I'm probably not going to get your vote or compete with that anyway. But at the end of the day, I'm going to speak that truth, and I'm going to get out and be in every one of Pennsylvania's 67 counties and make it abundantly clear that the Second Amendment and gun ownership in Pennsylvania is compatible with common sense gun ownership and gun reform legislation, that we can make a safer America, and one that is where we stop having to turn on the news and see countless school shootings and mass shootings in public spaces. We have become too desensitized to that. And pushing back against that is something that I would absolutely never give up doing if I was your next United States Senator.
Yes, you know, the problem is that the NRA has been using, they actually wrote the playbook for misinformation and disinformation, and they've been spending a lot of money in trying to convince Americans and even responsible gun owners that Democrats just want to take guns away, which is false.
And can I also say that, you know, as mayor, I was also in charge of a police department for 14 years. So this idea that I'm anti-law enforcement or anti, you know, safe gun ownership is just absolutely not true. Like, I'm a Democrat that took on gun violence and was successful taking on gun violence. And, you know, there's nothing that's not 100% compatible with safe, responsible gun ownership in my background. And getting out and making sure people understand that is going to be critical in what's going to be a tough cycle for Democrats.
Lieutenant Governor, other candidates have said that in 2013, you drew a gun on an unarmed black man. And I want to give you the opportunity to address these attacks now. If you can talk a little bit about this incident and how in the Senate you'd work to curb gun violence in communities across Pennsylvania.
Sure, absolutely. And it's important to talk about that because, one, you have to acknowledge that there was a history of over-policing and profiling in black and brown communities, and there is a history of harm and trauma there. So anyone that would hear some of those superficial details, especially as they've been misrepresented by people, would be understandably concerned. But that just wasn't absolutely the case in this instance. You know, setting the stage, Braddock, as Braddock's mayor and chief law enforcement officer. Again, Braddock was a community roughly about 75% black that had a sad and long-term history of gun violence. And it was quite common to hear gunshots. It was quite common to have shootings, and it was endemic to the community. So what happened on that day? It was in January, late afternoon. I was out. There was snow on the ground. I was with my 4-year-old and heard a burst of gunfire. Nobody else was out. After hearing that, I got my son secured. I called 911, and I saw an individual in a ski mask, dressed completely, covered head to toe, had no idea what his race was, running from where the gunshots were coming from, and heading towards our elementary school. And I made, as Braddock's chief law enforcement officer, after calling 911, I made a split-second decision to intercept the individual to make sure that the community was safe and protected, as I was, you know, always involved in doing. I would show up at every fire if there was an accident, any kind of these crime scenes. I was very hands-on because we were committed to, you know, eliminating and reducing gun violence or any kind of dangers in the community, and that's what I did. You know, when I contacted the individual, I stayed close by my vehicle. I never pointed the weapon at the individual. I want to be clear about that. I've never pointed it, and the weapon wasn't loaded. And the police showed up because I had called 911 shortly thereafter, and that was the end of the incident. At no point was I ever aware of this individual's ethnicity or race. At no point there was anything about this other than him being the lone individual running from where the gunfire was towards an area that was of public concern and safety as an active shooter situation. And I want to emphasize, multiple residents stopped the police and said, yes, there was undisputed gunfire coming from there. And again, in the community that was common. it was understood that's what it was, and that's exactly what happened that day. And I want to just say that 4 months later was the Democratic primary for mayor. And I was reelected by the Braddock and the residents, again, a community that's 75% black, by the largest margin ever, nearly an 80 to 20% margin, because every single person there understood that this had nothing to do with profiling or race, and it was all about public safety. And it's never come up. I was reelected that time, and then again for another term, and it only seems to come up when I'm running for elections like this, where individuals, they get a bad poll number, and they start talking about this and misrepresenting what was an episode that 9 years ago was completely understood by the people that know my heart, they know my record, and they know that that's what it was only rooted and grounded in.
Well, I thank you for being open and candid and willing to talk about that. These races sometimes get a little difficult, and it's just better to have an opportunity to tell your voters what exactly happened. So I'm appreciative of that.
I'm grateful for the opportunity too, because these were both individuals that I've worked with. They've understood, and they don't believe it any more than other people do. It had nothing to do with anything that they're claiming, and it has everything to do with the condition and the circumstances in our race. And it was only ever about my commitment to, one, public safety, and again, being a Democrat that successfully confronted gun violence as mayor. My proudest accomplishment as mayor is that we went 5.5 years without the loss of life through gun violence. 5.5 years, we lost nobody. I'm gonna.
Oh, wow.
On my arm are dates of every single homicide that I started putting on my arm because they were personal to me. I was at every scene. I was present for every one of the pieces of the aftermath. So gun violence and gun safety is something that has driven me. And if I never did anything else in public service, stopping the bloodshed for 5.5 years, which had never been accomplished before or since, is something that I'm very proud of. And we did it with a community policing model that honored the residents, that affirmed the relationship between a community police force that is responsive to the concerns, but also is respected by the community, and we didn't generate any corresponding claims of abuse or anything. We drove crime down and created that level of success without any allegations of police misconduct, because I believe that you can't have true reform unless you reform the policing model around community involvement and buy-in, and that's exactly what we did as my time as mayor.
How many dates do you have?
9, and they have a lot in common. They were all senseless tragedies. They were all African American, and they were all desperately missed by the relatives that were left behind. The first one was from January of 2006. And that was the first time I'd ever seen something like that up close and personal. And my commitment was to make sure that this stopped. Mm-hmm. And I was ridiculed, I was dismissed, like, good luck with that, John. But we were able to create partnerships, and we were able to generate enough resources and new programming. And we went, again, 5.5 years. And that's what I'm just incredibly proud of. And that's the kind of leadership and insight that I'd like to think I would bring if I was elected to the United States Senate.
Thank you, Lieutenant. I know that the audience has been waiting for this moment. We have some questions for you from the audience. First is Mary Beth. Mary Beth from Malvern. Where is Mary Beth? There she is. Hi, Mary Beth.
Hi, I'm Mary Beth Christensen. I am an ambassador for Giffords and a board member of Ceasefire PA. So I'm a gun violence prevention activist, and I'm here with activists from all over the state, Operation Save Our City, Ceasefire PA, Gun Census, Moms Demand Action, Students Demand Action. And one thing that we activists hear from candidates is that they can't publicly support both gun violence prevention legislation and the Second Amendment. They just won't go there. Like your response to that state of mind, and also could you tell us how you will prioritize gun safety legislation while also honoring the Second Amendment?
Great question. I don't know what candidates you heard that from, but you'll never hear that from me. It's like you can't be, pro-car, but you're anti-seatbelt. Like this idea that you can have safe, regulations and promote responsible ownership is compatible. It's a false choice, and one that I would never succumb to. I proudly would run on a platform of making sure that we enact sensible gun control legislation. They are wholly compatible with the Second Amendment. It is not necessary for you to own weapons of war. It is not necessary that we assume that it's okay, we can't act any laws, that a domestic abuser is able to get access to a weapon, or somebody that would harm themselves or go on a mass shooting. We need to make sure that we are very clear with what we are not willing to accept anymore, and that is this culture in this society where it's a given that you're going to see a mass shooting every other day on the news. We can't ever be desensitized to that. And how I can promise that it'll be a priority of mine is because it absolutely was a priority of mine as mayor, because the gun violence is a scourge. And I'm proud to say that I'm a Democrat that took on gun violence that no one said was possible to succeed, and we achieved a level of success through partnerships with the community and other law enforcement agencies that delivered that result that had never been achieved before or since. And, I still live in Braddock to this day, and that's going to be my home if I'm your next United States Senator or not. I've always lived there, and I'm going to continue to. And that's probably different than where most U.S. Senators live, in a place like Braddock. But it's where I've chosen to live and where I'm going to live. And it's hard to forget how critical gun violence is when you live in a community where it is still an issue, an ongoing issue. Hearing gunshots at night or knowing somebody that was killed, it's ever present when you're living in those kind of environments, and that will never be far from my thoughts, and certainly never far from my top legislative kind of priority.
Thank you so much. And now we have Adan from Philadelphia. Adan, hi Adan.
Hello, my name is Adan Mairena. I'm the pastor of the West Kensington Ministry. We're about 5 stops off the Market Frankfurt line from here in Kensington. And if you know anything about Philadelphia and gun violence, you know Kensington. I've lost youth, I've lost women and children due to gun violence. So like everybody here, this is important to my heart. I'm a board member of Ceasefire PA and work with other organizations, but I'm here as a Ceasefire PA board member. As we know, January 6th last year, we had an armed insurrection at our state capitol. After that, we've seen guns being used to intimidate polling places, peaceful protests, state capitals. So the question is, as our next U.S. Senator, what would you do to combat armed insurrection or the uses of guns to disrupt places like that?
Great question. But I've always believed in also being very honest and frank and direct with my answer. The truth is, if a state that you're in has open carry laws, there's nothing a U.S. Senator can do directly. That's the truth. Some of these states have open carry laws, and it's perfectly legal, and a United States Senator can't directly intervene and change that. But what we can do is eliminate the filibuster and pass comprehensive gun reform legislation federally that supersedes and eliminates the option to have open carry, because there is no good reason to have an assault rifle strapped on your back and walk around at an event. There's just no reason for that as a civilian. But that's the truth. But also, that kind of insurrection, misinformation needs a champion. And that movement found its voice in the former president. And we saw firsthand what someone was willing to do to lie to help undermine our democracy, and we can't ever let that happen again. And we need to enact comprehensive policies, especially on social media platforms, that prohibit that kind of incitement. Incitement is not protected speech. We are not and should not be able to, as a citizen, to say the kinds of things that the president did to create the kind of dangerous, combustible situation that we saw on January 6th. And that's just a basic fundamental truth. And as if I'm your next United States Senator, pushing for both of those things is something that I would absolutely, and committing to now, and would absolutely be a priority during my time in the Senate.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor Fetterman, for coming tonight, for talking about these issues that are so critical to the state. If Gabby would like to come now.
And I also, may I thank,
of course,
thank all of the activists and people that work with these groups. Thank you for the work that you do. I can't begin to acknowledge how much I appreciate your work, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be here. And I salute. Oh my gosh.
Pretty good. How are you? How are you?
Oh my gosh. Oh. Yeah. So.
I don't think. Yeah. You can finish your remarks now.
Okay.
Oh, no, I just like, oh my God, you didn't expect that. So, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for all the work that you do.
Thank you.
So honored to be here. So honored to be here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Governor.
Lieutenant.
Hello.
It's been a long night, but we got through it candidate by candidate, and I am confident that
Don't ask
we
me questions,
listen
Gabby.
to the next United States Senator from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, excuse me very much, lay out his plans to address gun violence here in Pennsylvania and across America. We are, of course, honored to have Gabby and Debbie here, and inspired by both of them on a daily basis. I have just one sort of parting thought, that fighting gun violence is hard, that it's a complex problem, but that we are going to solve this problem one step at a time. And that is exactly how Gabby Giffords has survived an assassination attempt, survived in a miraculous fashion a bullet through her brain, how she has made a courageous recovery and gotten to a point where she can stand before you today and talk about her survival, her recovery, and her ongoing fight with you to address gun violence in America. So for one final time tonight, I am very proud to introduce Gabby Giffords.
Thank you. Our lives can change so quickly. Mine did when I was shot. But I never gave up hope. I chose to make a new start, move ahead, to not look back. I'm relearning so many things, how to walk, how to talk, and I'm fighting to make the country safer. It can be so difficult. Loss is hurt. Setback is hard, but I tell myself, move ahead. I'm finding joy in small things. Ride my bike, playing the French horn, going to the gym, laughing with friends. The small things add up. We are living in challenging time, but we are up for the challenge. My own recovery has taken years. Many, many people have helped me along the way. And I've learned so much. I've learned when people care for each other and work together, progress is possible, a world is possible. But change doesn't happen overnight, and we can't do it alone. Join me. Let's move ahead together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philadelphia, and good night.